Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of the Cultured Nerd Podcast. This week we are saddened to talk about in length the legacy of David Lynch. It was reported that he passed away this morning, and he has actually had a significantly long-standing history on Hollywood as a whole. So we're going to talk about David Lynch, the properties of his that we loved, everything in between, and it's going to just be a nice dedicated episode to one of the filmmakers that really impacted us throughout our entire lives. So without further ado, let's talk David Lynch. And here we are.
And here we are.
Oh, you did go full red room with this one.
I'll be the Black Lodge. You be the White Lodge. It's funny. I'm old enough that I understand that death happens and that the heroes and people that I've worshipped and stuff like that are going to pass on. I knew David Lynch was sick. I knew that he smoked packs of cigarettes for a long, long time. He even talked about that. But I am truly saddened by the loss of this great artist.
Yeah. It's a hell of a thing because, like, yes, the older you get, the more, I think, what was the phrase? The older you get, the more life takes from you than it gives from you. Ooh. And when we get older, I mean, obviously Michael and I, we're born in the 80s, we're kind of pushing 40, and that's the sad reality of life. But this guy actually had a very robust career. And I remember when we were kids, you were the first person to show me the David Lynch Dune, and you just loved it. And I was like, this is a weird ass movie. And my dad was like, we don't watch that here because it's not as good as the book. But you loved it to pieces.
There's a millennial phenomenon that other children don't know in a world without the internet. When at a certain age, you only had the movies that were in your house, and then you would watch them over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
I had no idea who David Lynch was. I was a little kid, and that Dune movie rocked my fucking socks. I loved it.
I just remember, like, as kids, you were like, this movie's amazing. And I'm like, this is such a weirdly narrative. I was like, even as a younger kid, I was like, it's switching from like talking in the first person to the third person. I'm like, there's so many narrative like awkward jumps in this film.
The
like,
dreamer has awakened.
Yeah.
It's funny that I started with that, which arguably David Lynch would say is not a David Lynch movie. He did not have final edit over it. That he did not do the movie he wanted to do. He wanted to do way more esoteric stuff. And very clearly they made them like voice Jedis.
Yeah. My name is a killing word.
Yeah.
I remember that line. I'm like, that's a weird delivery.
Maudie. I didn't realize until I discovered his larger body of work that all of his ideas that speak to him as a filmmaker in that movie, you and I have never got to talk about this. So I'll ask you, Taylor, when did you first see Eraserhead?
When I first saw Eraserhead, I think it was not even,
because it's interesting that both you and me found David Lynch, but we found it not together. And I'll talk about, I mean, most of this podcast is going to be talking about Twin Peaks, okay? But before we get to that, when did you watch Eraserhead?
I think I first watched Eraserhead. I mean, it was 1977 film, so it was definitely before our time, so it existed. I think when I first discovered the weirdness and the craziness of that film, I was in my early adulthood. I think I didn't see it until I first got into streaming, and I was like on Netflix. I'm like, oh, I like David Lynch. I just started watching Twin Peaks. Let's try this. And I think I was like 21, 22. And I was like, what in the actual fuck is this movie? I was like, it was so, but that's when, like, when I first saw this, I'm like, okay, holy shit, this is insane. And then I kind of went back, and after I like when Twin Peaks starts, Twin Peaks is one of those shows where you're like, oh, it's a procedural crime drama, and then like a few episodes, and you're like, oh, there's demons and ghosts and monsters. This is not what I was expecting. And then that's when you start to realize that David Lynch has this very eclectic style. And I noticed that, and then I went back to Eraserhead. I'm like, okay, now I can appreciate this craziness of this film.
Especially with his kind of there's a lot of philosophy in his work, and he doesn't explain anything. No. There's all these great videos of people asking him, like, you know, in Blue Velvet, you're obviously critiquing the suburban lifestyle and clearly the lack of morals and the degradation. And he'll be like, no, you know nothing of my work. Like he it's such a deep personal thing. And I also feel like when you discover him matters. So I was going through something in my life when we were watching Twin Peaks. Were you going through anything stressful, or did it just become part of your normal viewing?
You know, Michael, you've known me since we were 5. You know that every aspect of my life has been stressful, and I was always going through something. Whether I realized it or not, I was making issues for myself as an adult.
Taylor, that's so real what you just said. That is true. But you've always used art and creativity as a lifeline for yourself to pull yourself up out of that stuff.
Like, I always had something happen. This was actually when I first discovered Twin Peaks. I started watching it, and then I revisited later again. I first discovered it. I was, I think I was going through like a breakup, like a really rough one, and I was kind of in this hole of like everything sucks, everything's sad. I'm gonna watch some crime movies and crime shows because watching mysteries always seemed to like get my mind off things, because mysteries to me were always like, okay, I will obsess over every detail.
It's wild that you keep calling it a crime show. You're right, and that's how they conned everybody, but that's not what the show is about.
I got conned into it that way because I saw it was like Twin Peaks, and then the description was like, an FBI agent is called to a small town in Washington to investigate a murder. I'm like, crime show, okay. And I put it on. I'm like, okay, this is insane, because like the opening crawl, you have like they find the girl's body wrapped up in plastic on a riverbed. I'm like, okay, this is pretty dark for 1990. Let's try this.
And it's wild that the show starts with the death and the discovery of Laura Palmer, but you, the audience, are also discovering like, oh shit, this girl's dead. Like, what are we gonna do?
And like I got it, I started watching it, and then I was like, maybe this isn't for me right now. Maybe I'm not ready for this show yet. And I got through like maybe the first season, and I was like, okay, I think I need to figure out some more shit I need to learn more before I jump into the rest of it, because there's a lot happening. I think it was like when I first saw the Red Room, I'm like, this is not what I thought it was. And I was like, okay, this show is different. And I revisited a few times over the years, and every time I revisited, I caught more things. I saw more stuff that I loved, and it became like, when I was in the dark parts of my life to the happy parts, like I watched it again after I got married, and I'm like, everything's great. Let me see if I'm in a better headspace to understand and grasp the show. And I'm like, I caught more, but it's still a crazy ass show. So like,
yeah, I also discovered it in a dark time in my life. When when the missus had her operation to remove her brain tumor, they had to go in through her nose, and then they took fat from her stomach to make a natural casing or whatever, so her brain juice wouldn't fall into her body.
Right.
So we weren't watching. We could not watch comedies, like, period, because they said, hey, don't sneeze, don't cough, don't laugh, because that started trauma. So I watched like a 9-hour documentary about all the Halloween movies. And then I watched another one all about the Freddy Krueger movies. That was like crazy long. I then watched all of the Hannibal Lecter movies. Right. We did Red Dragon, all of them. And it's funny. The murder of Laura Palmer is which got us. But the show was so of its own flavor. And I had played games like Deadly Premonition. I had played games like Alan Wake. And then you're seeing the show and you're like, oh, Here's all the references they're pulling from.
Yeah,
Here's
that was
the
actually
genre.
That was actually the reason I jumped to it the first time, because I remember I had seen the first gameplay trailer for Alan Wake, and I was like, damn, this looks so cool. And when did the first Alan Wake come out? I think that should give me context of how old I was when I jumped into it. 2010. Okay. So around 2010, I saw the trailer for Alan Wake, and I was how old were we in 2010? I was
24, 23.
Was it that age?
Yeah. Maybe older.
Maybe younger?
We graduated in 05. It's been 20 years since we graduated, Taylor.
I'm trying to remember. But in 2010, so yeah, about 23
Okay.
in there. Rocking a heartache, dealing with the breakup. Saw the trailer for Alan Wake in 2008, 2009 when they first started announcing it. I'm like, damn, that looks cool. And they're like heavily inspired by the work of David Lynch from Twin Peaks. And I was like, okay, well, maybe this is homework to get used to this game. And I started watching it. I'm like, if this is what the game's going to be like, it's going to be insane. And then I started playing that game, and I'm like, they just straight ripped so much from this game as the most beautiful love letter to this guy. And I'm like, you got the diner, you had some of the characters like the lantern lady's clearly the log lady, and I'm like playing this game, and I'm like, I got to go back to Alan Wake. I got to go back and forth between the two of these to truly grasp this, because this seems like they pulled this world and changed things for like obvious licensing reasons, but holy crap. And yeah, I fell in love with it. And then, I got married shortly after, watched it again, played it again, did all that stuff. And I just absolutely loved so much of this world. And then when they announced that they were doing the third season, like 25 years later, like the time frame that they gave in the show, like we will come back in 20 years or whatever it was. And they straight up were like, it's time. The time is up. Let's do the season. And he wrapped up his story literally by wrapping up the cliffhanger he did
And
in the second season.
And we have to say, in a world of canceled TV shows and things that never lived to their full potential, Twin Peaks got its swan song. And when, by the time The Return came out, I was already such a fan. The fact that we got 18 hours and he directed every episode.
And can we talk about how those 18 hours, like the hardest part that I had with that season wasn't that it was confusing or weird or anything like everyone else is saying. It was that you couldn't watch it week to week. It was literally an 18-hour long movie, and waiting 7 days in between each episode was so hard.
You're totally right. And when you watch it on the Blu-ray, we bought that shit. I've now watched it like 3 times because I keep showing it to new family members. Every time a brother-in-law, sister-in-law comes out, it's like, let's watch it.
What's Twin Peaks? I have a story for you. And
they put them in chunks of 3. They're like 3-episode arcs, and it changes the viewing experience of it.
Yeah.
And what's funny is people didn't understand it, and they were also talking about they didn't like it. I think it did. I think this show got hurt by the water cooler model and is way more intact when you can just like the Gen Z says, the show has a vibe. And The Return has a much different vibe than the original show, but you just like live in the world of this battle between good and evil. And it really is stakes of like these archetypal ideas.
Like angels and demons kind of stuff like that. And that was what like when I remember watching The Return, because like, so in preparation for watching The Return, I watched Twin Peaks 1 and 2 over again, loved it to pieces. Then I watched Fire Walk with Me, and that was probably the biggest holy shit. Like I felt dirty. It felt horrible. I was like, oh my God.
It
was so hard to get.
It adds, listen, that's how dirty that TV show is.
Yeah.
And they're not allowed to show it. That is the world, because The Return feels very much like that.
And that's what I was trying to tell people, that I'm like, so a buddy of mine was like, I'm ready to watch Twin Peaks, The Return. And I'm like, have you watched Fire Walk with Me? He's like, I never got around to it.
Stop what you're doing.
Watch that, because if you don't watch that, you will not understand a damn thing for the Return.
And it's
Like,
wild as
it
well
is
that
essential viewing.
yeah, and that movie is so horrific, but the tragedy that is Laura Palmer is horrific.
Yeah.
And even if these things are not real, but only real in the minds of our characters, you live through what it is to be a child that is abused. That is a very dark thing, but the show does it all, and the movie. It's the Bee Adventure with Kiefer Sutherland and what's his name? Chet, whatever the other FBI agent is. I wish we could have got more of that stuff. I wish we would have got more adventures with agents.
I legitimately loved how David Lynch throughout this universe threw in a little bit of David Bowie and just did it. It came and went like it didn't happen. And you're like, oh, that's David Bowie. Oh, it's over. What?
We're not going to talk about Judy. We're not going to talk about her at all.
Yeah. And then when you were like, who the hell's Judy? And you have to wait 20 years to find out who Judy is. And then when you find out who Judy is, you're like, oh no, this is so bad.
Like, it's Juday.
It's like, honestly, I feel like our glowing recommendation is like just watch Twin Peaks from the start to the finish, going with zero expectations, and it will wreck you and enlighten you simultaneously. It is one of those shows that changes you and changes your outlook of the world if you can handle it.
I would also say that you're going to watch it, and you're going to be looking for meaning, and you're going to go to YouTube, and you're going to watch the corn guy. He did a bunch of great videos. There's lots of people that done deep dives. The best part about Twin Peaks and David Lynch's work is that he is enthralled by the experience of the celluloid on film and your interpretation of it. And what it means to him kind of doesn't matter. It's what it means to you. What do these images speak in you? And I think that's why his work is so deep. I mean, if you don't want to go into Twin Peaks and the homework of that, I do recommend Eraserhead. Mm-hmm. I think to see where he starts, because you know how your band's first album is always your favorite? Yeah. His first movie is really good. It's weird, it's dark, it's amazing. I would then say Mulholland Drive.
Yeah.
As like a fun, weird thought experiment of dreams and playing with reality and darkness. I think it's a really great summation of it. And then you got to watch Twin Peaks. What are you doing? What are you doing? You're pussyfooting around. Go watch Twin Peaks.
Yeah. But it's funny because like I like David Lynch. We've talked about this. David Lynch was never a guy to mince words and never explain himself. He always it reminds me a lot of this one story I heard about Jordan Peele and how he snuck into a classroom where they were dissecting that one Get Out, and they were dissecting it and talking about all the symbolic stuff. And he's just sitting in the back of the classroom listening to all the theories, and they're like, why did he do this? Like, well, I think he did this, and he was just sitting there like, I just did it because it was cool looking, but this is amazing. And he was seeing people pull all of this stuff out of his work, and I feel like David Lynch had a meaning to all of his stuff, and he just never wanted to explain it because it was deeply personal. And with Eraserhead, he said, I think when we were early adults, he had an interview where he finally was like, yeah, it's probably my most spiritual film, and it's a movie about my fear of becoming a dad. And when you see it in that lens, you're like, all
of that. The fear of your child being defined. I mean, just you're right. You can, even knowing that tidbit gives so much credence to it. Now, mind you, people might not like his viewpoint. He was a very talented director, and when you watch movies like The Elephant Man, that's just a straight movie. It's very well executed.
Yeah.
My mom's favorite movie is The Straight Story, about an old man who visits his brother and has to sit on a lawnmower. A quiet, down to earth A to B movie, very well shot.
Yeah.
So his style was uniquely his own and feels so his own that once you are aware of it, you're going to see it everywhere. You're going to see it in Gravity Falls. You're going to see it in cartoons. You're going to see it in Chainsaw Man. You're going to see these flavors of things.
And it's funny because he had such a lasting impact on so many notable people that you see that flavor, that impact is. I mean, even Steven Spielberg talked about how he inspired him with some of his work. And you're like, that's Spielberg saying that someone inspired him. Like, that's actually pretty amazing. And then you have like people like Hideo Kojima from Konami.
Yes.
Who constantly gush about how much he loved Lynch's work. And if you look at his social media, he's known to just post a random picture and not say anything, but he would always be posting shit about Twin Peaks and be like, and you could see the influence in the Metal Gear Solid, you could Death Stranding, all of those projects, you could see the Lynch effect that he was doing with it.
And the way that Lynch uses players is funny, the way, because you brought up Hideo Kojima, but also, you know, look at the muse that Kyle MacLachlan has been for him. You know, he put him in Dune. Dune doesn't go there, but then he puts him in Blue Velvet, and Blue Velvet is a wild roller coaster of a movie.
And I wanted to actually bring something up because David Lynch, like you said, he's the one who gave MacLachlan his big shot. And people every day nowadays, you see everyone knows who MacLachlan is for one.
But if you don't know what he looks like, he looks like Agent. Right now. Yeah, I'll show you right now. This is my
Twin Peaks blanket.
This is my Twin Peaks blanket. So here's Kyle. That's early 90s Kyle MacLachlan. Here's him with Mr. C. You're not supposed to know about that yet. There's the man, the myth, the legend. Here's some coffee shops. There's some Kyle MacLachlan for you, Taylor.
Damn fine cup of coffee. But here,
cup of coffee.
He went on social media and actually shared a very long, heartfelt response and said,
"Oh."
And I'll share it with everyone just because it's really good. 42 years ago, for reasons beyond my comprehension, David Lynch plucked me out of the obscurity to star in his first and last big budget movie. He clearly saw something in me that even I didn't recognize, and I owe my entire career, my life really, to his vision. What I saw in him was an enigmatic and intuitive man with a creative ocean bursting forth inside of him. He was in touch with something the rest of us wish we could get to. Our friendship blossomed on Blue Velvet and then on Twin Peaks. I always found him to be the most authentically alive person I'd ever met. David was in tune with the universe and his own imagination on a level that seemed to be the best version of human. He was not interested in answers because he understood that questions are what questions are the drive that makes us who we are. They are our breath. While the world has lost a remarkable artist, I lost a dear friend who imagined a future for me and allowed me to travel in worlds I could never have conceived on my own. I can see him now standing up to greet me in his backyard with a warm smile and a big hug, and the Great Plains honk of a voice. We talk coffee, the joy of the unexpected, the beauty of the world, and laugh. His love for me and mine for him came out of the cosmic fate of two people who saw the best things about themselves in each other. I will miss him more than the limits of my language can tell and my heart can bear. My world is that much fuller because I knew him, and that much emptier now that he's gone. David, I remain forever changed, forever your Kale. Thank you for everything.
It's that love, that friendship, just all of it. It lives on film and it lives there in perpetuity, and it's so wonderful that we get to relive it. And I mean, I don't know if there's any other piece of art like The Return. You know what I mean? Like, there's not 18-hour television show of Spielberg or Scorsese.
I to this day will argue that what David Lynch did with The Return is probably a once in a lifetime thing that every filmmaker would have loved to achieve and only he could have pulled off.
Wait, you love Zack Snyder. Zack Snyder would kill for 20 hours of television. Yeah. 20 hours when I can do whatever I want to and I get final say on it. It truly
you
is.
You mean I get
great.
final cut on an 18-hour long movie And no matter how weird it is and how weird the ratings are, you're going to let me do it? Okay. Let's do this.
I also hope that Mark Frost, you can write any more books that you want to, but I feel like we need to leave. We need to not ever reboot this.
Yeah.
It just needs to live. It's its own thing, period. Because sadly, Dune isn't that, right? We're not getting Frank Herbert Dune. That show, the TV show, isn't that based on one of the Sun's books?
Kind of.
Okay.
My understanding is that they took, it's kind of like what they're doing with the Dune show was very similar to what they did with like the Lord of the Rings, where we have ideas based on notes and we have stories based on what the families have published, but a lot of it is our own territory because we don't have a lot to go off of. So I have some issues with the Dune show, just like I have some issues with the Lord of the Rings show. But it's hard to argue that at any point in the future that they should ever consider doing anything more with Twin Peaks. Let it exist as its own. Let the ending be as crazy and weird as it is. And
you could do another show that goes to the Red Room, but you can't call the show Twin Peaks. You can't let anybody know that it's going to happen. It has to be its own thing, and then maybe the arm can show up.
Yeah. Like, that's all you got to do. You just got to, like, if you want to expand on the world, but do not touch anything he did and do not blemish it.
Yeah, like, I'm okay with an Elseworlds tale, but I don't think we need to touch the main canon.
Like, it is what it is, and it is perfectly as it is. And I think to this day, I mean, every time I watch The Return, I sit down and I'm like, did I not notice that before? Let me talk. Like, because he had this, like, his love affair with his imagination, and like how, I mean, what Twin Peaks kind of implied in The Return was like the greatest evil to humankind was released the moment we created the nuclear bomb. And he implied that man is again become the instrument of its own destruction. They released a demonic entity into the universe, and now that is why the world had a like, it was just kind of the subtext that the world had a steady decline since the 50s because of the evil we unleashed on it, and that evil was a straight up demon named Judy that was trying to destroy everything.
And Twin Peaks, the original show, is this last bastion of goodness. Yeah. Because when you get back to it, The Return, the goodness in the town has corroded. And we see characters, we see the evil that has been inside of them harboring for a long time.
It's such a wild show. And like, you had so many things that if you look at the context and the subtext and all the things you could do, I think you could probably do college courses on the amount of subtext and implications that he created.
Oh, for sure.
And at the same time, he would probably walk in and say, you're all wrong. And that's the magic of what he did, because he created a beautiful story of good versus evil. He ended it the way he wanted to, in a way that was almost like a course correction in time, where let's change the game by removing ourselves out of time, create a new timeline, and then redo this battle with us together one final time. And it was like this amazing, symbolic, and just absolutely wild journey of a story. And the more you watch it, the more you're like, they won. And then at the same time, you're like, they lost. And there's so many times you can watch the show and be like, they're not going to win. And you get a different interpretation each time you watch it. And that's what's so magical about it.
Yeah, it is wild that every time I watch it, I do take something away from it. And it's not a show that I can turn on once in a while. I can't just turn on episode 8. You need to watch 1 through 7 to make that feel a certain way.
It's like I sit down, certain shows I'll sit down and be like, hey babe, I'm going to commit myself to this show for the next week. I'm sorry, but this is all I'm committing to. And I just like disappear. I lose myself into it. And that's what this show is, kind of one of those shows that do that to you. You can't just you can't casually watch it. You have to let it engross every aspect of your life. And if you don't, you're not going to get what you need out of it. Because unless you start from 1, you can't get through it. And then if you start from 1, you are now committed to it.
Now, the show and The Return can both be streamed on CBS All Access, or I should say Paramount Plus now. But that being said, there's a number of Blu-rays that have been released with special features and stuff like that. I highly recommend it if that's how you're going to view it. I think it's presented a little bit better. Just please support physical media. Everybody pick up a box set of this. Let's sell them out.
Yeah, and honestly, it's one of those. If you can get a copy of Fire Walk with Me,
I got it. I got the Criterion edition.
It is, like I said, it is not for the faint of heart. It is one of those stories that you will start watching and you will feel dirty while you're watching it. It's not like, and it's, to me, that was the biggest point. It was like, if you look at the story as a whole, it is the absolute climax of the story where they say, by the way, now that you know the context, let's show you what happened and let's show you how horrific all of this is. And it's one of those horror stories where you're constantly watching the worst unfold. And it's not quite, it's not like a horror story where there's like a monster jumping out. It's like traumatic, dark. It's something else. It's hard to describe, but it's
there's an argument in the community of should you watch Twin Peaks first and then Fire Walk with Me, or you could watch Fire Walk with Me and then watch Twin Peaks.
I firmly believe that you should never watch Fire Walk with Me first. In your first viewing, it's like when you say, how do you watch Star Wars? Everyone will say, start with A New Hope. Never start with the prequels.
Right.
Because the magic of the story is told with the reveals. And if you let those reveals, if you're watching it knowing the answers before going into it and then saying, oh, yeah, they're looking at the wrong guy. They're looking at this, looking at that. If you go into it knowing that, the shock value of each of the reveals is definitely lessened.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. Well, I'm happy to know that he resonated with you the way that he did with me. And I hope that if you haven't discovered him, I hope this inspires you to go check him out. If he is one of your favorites, give him a watch. My heart goes out to him and his family. What a body of work. I'm very thankful to have stumbled upon him, and I will probably revisit his work for the rest of my life.
There's no way around it that everyone that was involved in each and one of his projects knew exactly who he was. They were all inspired and confused by him as a human being. But he himself was probably one of the most genuine auteur creatives that have ever existed in Hollywood. And he got that 1 in a million chance to do exactly what he wanted without interference. And that's something that I still do not understand, how the studio believed in him that much to allow it to happen, because every one of his projects, the moment they come out, they were not well received because they're so confusing. But they become almost instant cult classics, and they last. They build a bond and a trust that you don't see in other places. So David Lynch will be missed. But on that note, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see you next time. Have yourself a great night.